Hi there, I'm Karen McCarthy, and it's time to Karen-ize. Today is Wednesday when we talk about spiritual health. And last week we talked about New Year's resolutions and doing things to improve ourselves. And in this last week, another word, now my word for the year was consistent, and another word keeps kind of cropping up. And I think that it definitely bears some discussion. And that word is contentment. Now, some of us have no problem being content, especially when things are going really well in our lives. Um, but it's really important that we learn to be content, not complacent, content, no matter what's going on, to be joyful no matter what's going on. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit scripturally. A lot of times people say, if God is such a loving God, why does he allow pain in our lives? Why are things allowed in our lives that are hard? And would a loving God allow pain in his child's life? Well, if we think about it, now I know that there's kind of a trend in our society these days to make life super easy for our kids and give them everything they want and not require um, even chores, not require them to even do chores. I've heard that a lot. Well, my philosophy and the Bible's philosophy, the Bible talks about training up our children, is that our job as a parent is to prepare those kids for life. Teach them how to, do the things to take care of themselves, the life skills, but also teach them how to handle life, how to make decisions, how to not just jump into decisions and to think things through. And if we don't give them practice time as kids and they go out into the world on their own, it's hard for them to stand on their own 2 feet. And you may think that you're always going to be around to help them, but you might not be. And really, they need to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, the first lesson that God really showed me when I was parenting, teaching, running the youth group, being a foster parent, all those kinds of things, is that there is a process to teach our kids decisions. And one of those is allowing them to make mistakes to learn from them. Now, there are some mistakes you don't want them to make, like running out in the street in front of a car, those kinds of things. But there are other decisions that they can make, and it's going to be a painful consequence when they make the wrong decision, but it's also going to be a huge life learning experience. Now, when I was teaching, I was working with kids with emotional problems, issues, whatever you want to call it. And at one point, we were studying the government, the structure of our government, and they wanted to create a constitution for our little school. We were on a campus with group homes, and so there was maybe 24 kids, I think, at that time. And they wanted to create a constitution. And I said, great, because as you do things like that, that's how most people learn better than just having someone tell you or reading the textbook. And they were coming up with things that were not going to work. And I had a gal who was helping in the classroom. She was they called it a TST. They were there to really help with the behaviors and things like that. And also, just with the general classroom stuff. And she had experience with the state legislature. Her mom was a state legislature. I can't remember what her position was. And she was like, yeah. And I said, stop. And she says, but they're doing it wrong. I said, I know. But if you tell them that lesson is going to last like 2 seconds. But if they go through this and they learn through their experience, oh, that's not going to work, that lesson is going to be long-term and long-lasting. So when we allow them to learn from their mistakes, it really has longer benefits than if we just stop them or tell them, oh, that's not going to work because. Same thing with me. I mean, I've talked before about some really hard emotional things that I had to go through a couple of years ago. And what they did was cause me to stop and look at myself and find some things that hadn't been working too well. Some of them had to do with the way I was able to respond to things because I was so sick. But a lot of them were just things that I really needed to tweak in my personality. And I really learned through those mistakes and through that hard time. So we can learn valuable lessons by going through those hard times, where if God made everything easy, well, if we look in the Old Testament, what happened every time things got too easy for the Israelites? They turned from God and they started doing really stupid things. So having life easy isn't always in our best interest. So we've heard of Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who love God. So when we're in the midst of a traumatic event, we don't really want to think about that necessarily then. But later on, we can look back and see, okay, if we allow God to work in that situation and work on us, work on other people, there are amazing things that can come out from those situations. I've said before, when my dad had his brain tumor and was going through all of those health things, some of the really cool things that came out because of his response to the situation, because of his church family's support, because of what we as his kids saw through that illness. I mean, some of those things were amazing, and they would not have happened had he not been ill. And so I know he would not regret having to go through that. So we can go through those trials and allow God to work in them, and they can end up with some kind of cool things. Doesn't mean those trials are going to go away. Doesn't mean everything's going to turn out perfect there, but we can have other things happen that really do turn out. James 1:2 tells us to count it all joy when we fall into afflictions. Now that was really tough. Rejoice over trials, count it all joy. What in the world? I used to think it was telling us to be joyful for those things, to count the hard times as a great blessing, which it can be. But what it's really saying is to rejoice in spite of the affliction, to know that God is holding us up and that these things are happening for a reason. We may not see it. We may not even know the reason this side of eternity, but they are happening for a reason. And so we can rejoice in spite of the affliction. We can rejoice through the affliction and just lean on God. So now when I'm going through something like this, I really try to remember I need to listen to or sing praise songs, read motivating books, go and read praises to God. Have you ever noticed in the Psalms, a lot of times the Psalms will start out whining and complaining, stressing out over trials that the psalmist was going through. But I can't think of a single one that by the end of that psalm, the writer hasn't turned to God in praise and thanking him for what he does, thanking him because he knows that God is in charge of that situation. So they've learned that secret of praising in the midst of trials. And once we've learned to do that, it's much easier to watch and see how God is going to use that trial to his glory to enrich our lives and maybe the lives of others because of it, like it did through my dad. So the next time you're going through a trial, remember to look up and reach for the help we have available to us in just those times. You know, a long time ago, 3 decades ago maybe, I was living in Pocatello, Idaho, and my pastor there had a motto, keep the sun in your eyes, S-O-N. Keep your eyes on the sun and you will get through it. He's our light, and when we keep our eyes on him, the trials really do seem so much more manageable. So I hope this blessed you today, and I will talk to you next time. Have a blessed week.